Hi everybody. Today Rose, Jerry and I will present the research project which is titled From London Day Training College to IOE. The time period we choose is from 1922 to 1932. And the research question is, what are the preparations and the challenges of the transformation of LDTC to IOE? While exploring the research question, we aim to achieve two research objectives, which includes making an in-depth exploration of the details of IOE's establishment and also enriching IOE's current and future students' knowledge of the history of IOE. And this is our catalog, where we have divided our research projects into 9 sections. UCL-IOE, the UCL Institute of Education, is one of the UK's leading centers for education research and teacher training, and is also favored by countless students because of its top QS major ranking since 2014. What many people do not know is that IOE was founded as LDTC, which is London Day Training College, and the name IOE has only been in use since 1932. From being a training school in 1902 to later becoming the IOE in 1932, and then officially merging with UCL in 2014 to become UCL's 11th college. In the 118-year history of the IOE to date, each of its transformations has played a crucial role. In our research project, we aim to focus on the transformation from 1922 to 1932, which is the decade in which transition from LDTC to IOE took place. In this kind of transition, the preparations for and the challenges for this transition will be highlighted.
The Institute of Education, IOE, was established on 6 October 1902 as the London Day Training College, and was originally situated at the London School of Economics and the Cinemas Inn before moving its first permanent home on South Liverpool. As the Richard Aldrich's history of the Institute explains, its origin lay in the transformation of the education in London, which follows the 1870 Education Act and the introduction of the compulsory elementary education. LDTC is the only government-controlled day training college in London. The LDTC was established by the 4 organizations, the main body being the London County Councils and supported by the London School Board and the education committees. And eventually the Day Training College was established. The work of the college was controlled by the London County Councils and the academic support was provided by the University of London. The first president appointed by the LDTC was John Edmonds, who was also the first professor of the education at LDTC. At the beginning, there were only 58 students in the university, and they were all about 20 years old. The main purpose of the school is to train teachers and then to obtain professional training certificates prescribed by the Board of the Education. In the early days, LDTC's school years changed a lot. In 1903, because of the increased pressure on students with the new graduate diploma, a 2-year non-university standard course was put into use in 1904. In 1909, the college became a full-fledged School at the University of London, and the 3 years course was extended to 4 years. Consist of the 3 years of the study, the final year will be oriented towards professional training. From the second years, all students must take a 4-year course. During the 1920s, the LDTC continued to provide a variety of training, primarily for teachers in secondary education, as well as courses for those interested in educational management. It was not until 1928 that the LDTC was fully handed over to the university, and in 1922 the college was renamed to Institute of Education, University of London.
LDTC was officially transformed into IOE in 1932. What was the reason for transformations? And the key information is especially important. The first point is, at the time of LDTC was mainly focused on training primary school teachers. But over time, the standard curriculum and the qualifications were no longer to qualify the education committees. However, the diploma of the university graduate were holding the values. At that time, 80% of the students with first or second class degree were preparing to teach in the secondary school. But LDTC was not a formal university, which is training center. That means it was far away to meet the practical needs. That is one of the reasons LDTC need to reform and be stronger.
The other point is that LLCs were the monopolies of the education and the training center at that time, and there were the financial backbones of the LDTC. But unlike the other training colleges, they were all established by the universities themselves and maintained an autonomy. For example, the training department established for men at King's College in 1890, and for women at Bedford College in 1892. This means that while other colleges are free to develop or create new programs, LDTC is subject to directly of the superior leadership, the LLC. Although LDTC is also under the jurisdictions of the LCC, they always retain and strictly control the right of the LDTC, and hopes that LDTC will develop steadily in the field of primary school teachers training. For example, in 1908, the University of London refused to recognize the LDTC as a school of the university until the LCC allows the staff to establish a representative board of directors with the authorities to advise on academic matters on behalf of the growing body itself. From the outside, the LDC appears to be more than a metropolitan or national leader, with a great autonomies like any other growing group of trainees.
I'm going to talk about the conflicts between the London Day Training College and the London County Council. As Jerry said before, a clash of policies and cultures emerged between the London County Council's determination to retain and exercise control for the purpose of providing a steady supply of good teachers to its primary schools, and the LDTC's desire for greater autonomy. In 1908, The University of London refused to recognize the LDTC as a school of the university until the LCC allowed staff to establish a representative board with the authority to advise on academic matters on behalf of the governing body itself. And the provision of student hostels was also a controversial issue at that time. Accommodation was available to students from other colleges of the University of London and day training colleges attached to other universities. LDTC staff and students often requested the provision of student accommodation as a means of developing national and international dimensions and recruitment, as well as in order to encourage corporate identity. However, from the point of view of the London Education Centre, the purpose of the LDTC was to train former students from London schools to become teachers in London schools. Therefore, they could live at home during their training. For example, in 1921, Philip Fawcett, Assistant Officer for Higher Education at the LCC, informed Margaret Ponet, the Vice-Chancellor of the LDTC, that the LCC would neither approve the provision of dormitories nor appoint officials to oversee students' housing arrangements. Such restrictions were irksome. In 1914, John Adams, the first president and professor of the LDTC, wrote a memorandum advocating the LDTC's independence from the LCC. Now I'm going to talk about the preparations of transferring the LDTC from the London County Council to the University of London. By 1932, LDTC began training students for leadership positions in all branches of education in the UK and overseas, and became a center for educational research. In that year, the London County Council generously gave up its authority and control, and the LDTC became the Institute of Education of the University of London, a title it still retains. The LCC also provided a grant of up to £200,000 for the Institute and Birkbeck College generously, of which £150,000 was later allocated to the Institute by the court. In February 1932, the Lord President consented in writing to the transfer of the London Day Training College from the London County Council to the University as from September 1st in 1932. This statement was approved by the Education Committee of the LCC at its meeting on March 9th in 1932. The transformation caused much celebration among LDTC and university staff and students. Even the Board of Education expressed its approval of the great educational advantages which it is hoped to secure by the transfer of the college from the LCC to the university. The left picture is the approval letter for transferring the LDTC from the London County Council to the University of London. This is the description of the institute and the details of transferring the LDTC from the LCC to UOL. There were also many challenges in the transition process. Academic and professional issues including students, curricula, teaching, and research were a controversial area in the transition from LDTC to IOE. Constitutional and administrative matters were also significant. This required lengthy negotiations between the LCC, the Education Committee, and the university. By 1932, two potential problems were also apparent. The first was financial. At a time of general economic depression, there was no guarantee that the University Grants Committee and the University of London would be able to treat the institute more generously, or even as generously as the LCC had dealt with the LDTC. The second problem was a constitutional one. Hitherto, the university had championed the cause of greater freedom of action for the LDTC and its staff. The new Institute of Education, however, together with the very subject of education, was regarded with suspicion in some quarters of the university and found itself subject to a number of constraints. Yet the timing of this shift is unfortunate. The decade of the 1930s began with depression and ended in war. During the economic recession, there was no guarantee that the University of London would treat the Institute of Education more generously than the LCC. Moreover, instead of becoming a separate college of the university as it had been in 1909, the newly established institute in 1932 was given a lesser title of a central activity. It was therefore conducted under the direction of a delegation appointed by the university's senate. Even the plan of relocating to the university was delayed, and it was not until 1938 that the Faculty of Education took possession of a new set in the north wing of the university's Senate House. In the following year, at the outbreak of war, it was forcibly evacuated to Nottingham.
John Adams was the first president of the LDTC. He was born on the 2nd of July in 1857 and died in Los Angeles in 1934. Before he became the president of the LDTC, he was the professor of the education at two Scottish universities. At that time, his faculty was basically the ceiling of the education department. However, coming to LDTC may be a difficult issue for him. The institute will train teachers for elementary schools, and Adams himself wants teachers to receive a middle or a high school graduate level education. During Adams' 20 years as a president, LDTC developed into a thriving institution with a national reputation, with students' numbers increased from 101 in 1903-04 to over 900 in 1922, and there was no difficulty in attracting a highly qualified staff with a range of subject expertise. Cyril Byrd was born on 3rd of March 1883 in Stamford-on-Avon and died on 10th of October in 1971 in London. Byrd studied at Oxford, and he also took a psychology thesis and the psychology thesis as an elective. Educational psychology became his main interest. In Liverpool, he was appointed as a part-time psychologist for London County Council. His main task was to identify and assess children who require special education treatment due to mental abnormalities or behavioral disorders. Byrd went to work for the London County Council between 1924 and 1932 as a professor of educational psychology at the London Day Training College. He gave lectures and practical courses, which are his specialties subjects subjected to psychiatric tests and juvenile delinquency, and he's made significant contributions to developmental research and advanced academic work.
So in this section, some academic background on IOE and how it differs from LDTC will be discussed. In 1932, LDTC was transformed into the Institute of Education of the University of London. IOE, which is the largest institute in the UK specializing in education and related disciplines, is not only the only education school in the UK to be ranked at the highest level of all research accreditation activities, but also has the major global presence in research, education training, higher degree programs, educational consultancy, and those social sciences related to education. Since its establishment in 1902, the college has been engaged in teacher training, with 1,000 students enrolled each year in its teacher training programs. The college offers undergraduate, master's, and doctoral programs. The London-Day Training College was founded in the year of 1902. In 1932, the LDTC became the Institute of Education of the University of London. Changes in name, status, and function were reflected in changes of location. From 1902 to 1907, the LDTC had no home of its own. Beginning in 1907, it was housed in the first of its 3 new buildings in Southampton Road. In 1938, as the Institute of Education, it transferred to the north wing of the Senate House of the university. It then moved to its present location in Bedford Way in the year of 1976. By 1932, the LDTC was indeed beginning to prepare students for positions of leadership in all branches of education in Britain or overseas, and to become a kind of center of educational research. This characteristic also reflects the major difference between IOE and the LDTC, so that IOE has shifted from training teachers to doing some educational research. In its early days, the purpose of the LDTC was to train teachers for service in London's elementary schools. After becoming IOE, increasing diversification was apparent. The standard course and qualification was no longer the Board of Education's certificate, but the university's diploma. Nowadays, it was poised to become not only the acknowledged leader of educational studies in the UK, but also a center of educational thought, inquiry, and training for the British Commonwealth. Now it's time for our debate session, where Rose, Jerry, and I will go through 3 questions to review our topic. For me, the first question is, please select one that is not the current research field of the IOE. And option A is social science related to education. Option B is psychology related to education. C is the science of or theory of education. And D is political science related to education. So, what do you guys think?
I think I should choose D because in my first year of course selections, I found that there were courses in sociologies and psychologies, and education theories was a compulsory course for us. So by eliminating these 3 options, I choose D.
I agree with Jerry. Judging from my common sense, I don't think political science and education are directly related.
Okay, this is actually a relatively simple question, and you are right. As Jerry said before, our course selection includes education-related sociology and psychology. And in addition, IOE is also conducting research on education-related philosophy, which is also appearing in our course selection.
So the second question is, in the late 19th century England, elementary schools were supplied for the children of A. the working classes, B. the middle classes, or C. the upper classes. What do you guys think?
So for this question, I think it would be C, the upper class, because I believe that only the rich people would have the money for their kids to go to school.
I will choose between the option of B and C, as I think there will be a few working class parents who would send their children to school.
Actually, the correct answer is A, the working classes. In late 19th century England, schools and teachers were divided on social class lines. Elementary schools were supplied for the children of the working classes, and other schools, designated here as secondary, catered for those of the middle and upper classes, while elementary schools included both boys and girls. The great majority of secondary schools were divided on gender lines. For example, only boys attended the great public schools such as Eton and Winchester.
Okay, now, so my question is, what are the noble achievements of Thomas Percy New, who served as the second president of LDTC?
I think I should choose A, because when I research about the LDTC and IOE information, I indirectly read the profile of Thomas Percy New, and then found that the book Education was his famous work.
I'm not very sure. Maybe option B?
Eris, you're right. It is the book Education, and it is published in 1902.
In the past, as LDTC, IOE was the public body that trained primary school teachers with the aim of providing courses for those who intended to teach in elementary schools. Day training colleges were intended to provide courses for them, and thus to supplement the existing 43 residential training colleges which came under voluntary control. It is also important to emphasize that the day training colleges were founded as the second phase of the public provision of institutions for the training of teachers for elementary schools. Today, IOE is a research-led postgraduate institution with 45 professors and 4,400 students from 80 countries. It is very far removed from the London Day Training College of 1902, with its one professor and 58 young students who were firmly located within the tradition of training for teaching in elementary schools. Thus, in spite of the predominance of higher degree students, specialist research units, and the national and international roles, IOE, like its predecessor, LDTC, still retains its commitment to the initial training and education of teachers at primary, secondary, and further education levels. So in summary, the shift from LDTC to IOE thus illustrates that from 1932 onwards, IOE began to place more emphasis on educational research than on the training of teachers. However, this kind of shift still involves compromises. For example, a large proportion of IOE students are now still prepared to teach in primary or secondary schools after their graduation. However, the compromise contained in that metamorphosis still obtains. Each year, large cohorts of students are prepared for teaching in primary and secondary schools and in further education. That's all there to our presentation. Thanks for watching.